Well, good afternoon, everyone who is joining us for our fifth DEI Facilitation Spring Series. And this is the third in a series for services for independent living. This is their third and final presentation, Rene, Powell, and Jill McClintock. And I will introduce them formally in just a moment, but I first want to start out by sending a big thank you to Shashan Dial, who is the inaugural Director of Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion at Stevens College. She has done a tremendous amount of thoughtful and diligent work to be able to get this series in particular and all of our facilitations up and going, and has just done a fabulous job for these spring presentations. And then I'd also like to send out a thank you to Shannon Walls, who is our coordinator, our Title IX coordinator. She's also contributed her time and talents, wisdom, thought, and overall support for all of these facilitations. So big thank you to her. And thank you to all of you who have been present and active in these presentations, asking questions and being thoroughly engaged. Today, Jill and Rene will be sharing the independent living philosophy and the impact of the pandemic on people with disabilities. And if you haven't been present the last two SIL presentations, I'll just run through quick bios for both. So Jill McClintock has worked at Services for Independent Living for 14 years, supporting individuals with disabilities, supporting seniors, and supporting veterans so that they can live independently in their homes and in their communities. As education and training coordinator and facilitator of PAVE, People Advocating for the Voice of Equality, she is passionate about learning, as well as passionate about SIL's vision of creating a barrier-free community for all. Rene Powell is a perpetual student. She is an engaged citizen, a disabled advocate, and activist in support of movements that seek to address various forms of oppression and injustice. Rene is a member of the Columbia Disabilities Commission and Public Transit Advisory Commission. She's a board member of the Columbia Boone County League of Women Voters, participant and supporter of Race Matters Friends, and previously, she was a member of the Governor's Council on Disability. So a warm welcome for both Jill and Rene, and we'll let them take it from here.
Okay, thank you so much for the great introduction, and thank you so much for having us for this third and final time. And any questions or comments you have throughout, just we'll keep an eye on the chat and try to answer those. So let's start with diving into the independent living philosophy. And as we have this discussion, I want you all to think about what independence means for you in your life and the choices and decisions that you make in your life every day and that you may take for granted as you think about what it means to be independent. So that just kind of frames the discussion that we'll be having. So the first thing I want to say about independent living philosophy and independence is independence is going to mean something different for each individual. So the individual defines what independence and independent living means for them. But there are some just general principles that we will discuss. And really, independent living and independence does not mean that we do everything on our own. With or without disabilities, we all need support, and we are all interdependent. So I'm keeping those general principles in mind as we move forward. So people with disabilities are the experts in their life. They know what's best for them. They know more than anyone what goes on in their life, what they need, what works best for them. And the main thing for us as people with disabilities is we want to be a part of our communities and contribute to our communities. And that's what independent living is all about. And in your resources provided in the handout, one of major decisions for people with disabilities that made an impact is the Olmsted decision, a Supreme Court decision from 1999, easy for me to say, that said the ADA, the Americans with Disabilities Act, said that unjustified segregation of people with disabilities constitutes discrimination. So the whole idea is that if people with disabilities want to live in the community, that should be their right, and the goal should be to put them in the least restrictive environment. So living in an institution, not to say people with disabilities never live in nursing homes or institutions, but the goal should be for people with disabilities to live and be part of their community. Do you want to add on to that piece, Rene?
Well, I think there's some gray area to consider. For example, supported living environments,
Yes.
where people need a little more help than you or I might need in carrying out our daily activities. You know, sometimes that is the situation people are in, and that just having a little more help allows them to maximize their daily independent lives.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So just because somebody needs supports does not mean, okay, automatic go-to is nursing home. You want to keep them in their home environment with the supports that they need in, like I said, the least restrictive setting. You know, keeping in mind some other factors, but that is the ultimate goal. But yes, we all need different levels of support, but that does not mean that we should just pool everybody together. All people that need support need to go into a restrictive environment. The main thing, if I give you no other message today than this one, and it seems kind of, it probably seems like a no-brainer, but I always love to say this when I talk about independent living philosophy. People with disabilities, funny enough, have the same hopes, dreams as everybody else. And so I think a lot of times what happens is we kind of, when people without disabilities, whether it be, you know, family, friends, sometimes don't put certain goals or dreams on the table because they think they're not achievable by people with disabilities. But just to know that in my mind, are there going to be hurdles as a person with a disability? Are there going to be some things that I'm going to struggle with? Absolutely. But I really, first and foremost, am a human being with the same desires and dreams as everybody else, and there's no reason why I shouldn't be able to live my goals, or achieve my goals and live my dreams. And so the main idea that we're talking about here is empowering people with disabilities. Yes, we need support, but we do not need to be taken care of. It is about empowering the individual with the disability. And so what we're going to dive into now is talking about the 4 C's, the 4 main principles of independent living philosophy. So we are going to start with choice. So for people with disabilities living independently, choice is important. Where we live, transportation options, where we work, where we go to school, our health care, who we socialize with, who we get into relationships with, who we marry, whether we have children or not. These are all choices that people without disabilities take for granted every day, but these are choices people with disabilities, you know, continue to fight to make And really, I take nothing for granted when it comes to choices, because I know I really value my independence. And I know Rene can touch on historically some of those choices, due to laws and regulations, were not given to us not all that long ago in the historical context.
Yes. Well, yes, in Colombia, living in Colombia, I can attest to what I've seen with our transportation system growing, and how I had much more limited options in the past. And in the late 90s, it started to grow more, and they started to improve the public transportation options. As a person who cannot drive, that is the choice I have. So it makes sense to live in Colombia. So that's a choice I make.
Mm-hmm.
One thing I didn't realize when I was growing up was I thought the only choice was to drive. And so like that was part of my strategy of passing to. And if it had entered my mental sphere when I was a senior in high school, that it would make sense to live somewhere that has good public transit, then I might not have felt so much pressure. But it was just not a part of our daily reality. So none of us thought of it. In my parents and I, it just was not on our radar.
And you are a student of history, and you have educated me on the history of disability rights and disability. It was not that long ago that people with disabilities were not allowed to marry and were
Right.
not allowed to have children. There was forced sterilization because they were not seen as, suitable candidates to carry on.
There were actually some lies published about genetics and genetic and it was a faulty scientific understanding of genetics and the likelihood of passing on conditions and things like, and that led to, it was a really unfortunate era in our history, the eugenics movement, where they put a lot of restrictions in place for who can marry and who can reproduce. And
I think there are still views, and when we talked about myths and misconceptions in a previous presentation, I think there are still myths and misconceptions today about people with disabilities being seen as suitable partners, suitable parents,
right,
suitable employees. So, we continue to talk about the importance of breaking down those stigmas and those attitudinal barriers as we move forward and, maintaining our independence and letting people know how valuable that is to us. So the second principle, the second of the C's, is control. We control our lives. At Services for Independent Living, where I work, we help individuals develop independent living plans. In these plans, we do not tell them what their goals should be. They utilize our support and our resources, of course, to develop their plans, but this is their plan. We're not telling them, oh, that's a ridiculous goal. Our goal is to say, okay, this is your goal. What are the steps you're going to take to get there? What is your piece in all this? And what support do you need from us to make it happen? And one of the programs that we have at Services for Independent Living is called Consumer Directed Services. So the people that we serve are consumers. And so Consumer Directed Services, they are the employer. So individuals with disabilities that need support in the home can hire their own personal care attendants, and they are the employer. They manage their attendant, how they want their services done. They fire their attendant, they interview them, and then they just utilize our staff as supports in carrying out those services. And with control comes responsibility. And so, and with choice comes responsibility. And so one of the main things that I also like to stress when we talk about this issue is that, do people with disabilities make poor decisions? Absolutely, as do people without disabilities. Do we need to make mistakes in order to learn? Absolutely, as do people without disabilities. But I think there is this view that we have to protect people with disabilities from failure, and you know, kind of shelter them. I grew up, bless their heart, I grew up with parents that really wanted to shelter me, and I finally, when I moved out on my own, I said, yeah, thank you for your advice, but if I screw up, I screw up, just like anybody else in life. So give me that opportunity to do that. And if we fail, we learn from it and go to plan B, C, D, E. And Rene can chime in on this as well. But when we talk about control, the major issue that comes up is guardianship for people with disabilities. So Rene, do you want to touch on the issue of guardianship and kind of the view of how we look at guardianship?
Yeah, it's really just the way anyone seeks advice from their peers and from family and from friends, as an alternative to guardianship. To understand that the way we all do life is if we seek advice from people we trust. And that's just, you know, if you want an auto mechanic, or if you're looking for something to buy, or, you know, you look, people ask their friends to recommend realtors or car dealerships, or, you know, and do all of these things. And when people with disabilities have done such things, a lot of times it's been magnified and viewed as incompetence, and instead of just an adaptation and a normal way to do things the way we all do.
What you're talking about, Rene, is the concept of supported decision making.
Right.
And again, I go back to looking at it in the context of people without disabilities. Do you know how to make decisions? I mean, do you make decisions without consulting anybody else? Do you sometimes need help managing your finances through a financial planner? This is not really the same concept of guardianship. Should be an option of last resort, because it does take away people's rights. And so when we have to look at supported decision-making alternatives to guardianship, as opposed to that being the first option we go to if somebody is having trouble making decisions. So not to say guardianship is bad, and I'm not here to advocate that guardianship is not something that should be considered in certain circumstances, but look at your other options, because it does take away some quite a few rights, including the right to vote. Now there is partial guardianship, and there is durable power of attorney, a payee for handling finances. So just again, going back to that, what is the least restrictive alternative? Giving people the chance to maximize their decision making. And do you have to agree with the decisions that they make? Absolutely not. That's not the benchmark we look at.
Right. A payee is nothing more than an accountant.
Right.
Payees and is a synonym for an accountant.
And
And there's a reason why that's a very reliable industry.
And I would venture to guess that if we took a look at everybody's finances here that's attending this presentation, you probably all are not making the wisest financial decisions. Does that mean that you need somebody to take over your finances because you're not capable? Absolutely not. But we all kind of need to kind of remember the difference between needs and wants. And in certain times in my life, when I need the retail therapy, my wants overtake my, they overtake things for a while, and I get into a little, my credit card kind of scares me when I look at the statement every month, but I think that's no different than anybody else. I'm fully capable of understanding my money. I just don't make the best decisions sometimes. And so one last thing about control, centers for independent living are staffed, their staff and their board are 51% makeup of people with disabilities. So the staff and board of Centers for Independent Living are made up of the people that they serve. And so I want to turn it over to Rene for the last, not to put too much pressure on you, Rene, but change and community are really the two that I think you represent who you are. So you want to talk about what change and community mean when we talk about independent living? I put it on the spot.
Change community, to me, that was one of the greatest advantages of getting to know more people with disabilities and learning more about what I had in common with people I didn't realize I had a lot in common with, and learning about our experiences and our similarities and how to navigate, and getting advice from other people with disabilities, which is a huge piece of that puzzle. And as far as we've had to learn to see the world as constantly in need of repair, where things can, where we see that where things can be better. And we are always advocates for making way for ourselves and our peers.
And I can tell, and I've told Rene this, but I can tell you as a person with a disability that was trying to feel comfortable in their own skin and trying to figure out, where do I fit in this world as a person with a disability. Rene, knowing somebody like Rene, yes, we have different disabilities. Our experiences are not entirely the same, but having that other person and other people in my life with disabilities to kind of show me the way. And people without disabilities can give you advice, but it's the people with disabilities that say, I get exactly what you're talking about, and
right.
this is what I've done, and that's invaluable. People with disabilities helping and supporting each other. And that's one of our core services at Services for Independent Living, is peer support. And I feel like I really got that from Rene. And the other main thing that I got from Rene, which was totally foreign to me before I met her, is the whole concept of disability pride. That I could actually be proud of my disability, proud to be a part of the disability community. That was not a concept that I was on my radar before I met Rene. And so I'm grateful for those things that she's taught me.
Yeah, we have a valuable history, and it involves a lot of creativity, which is one of the things that I love most about it, is the
Yes. And when we talk about change, I think one of the attitudinal barriers is those angry people with disabilities that are always wanting something, always wanting special treatment. And that's not what it's about. It's about equal opportunity. And like I said in the very beginning, just wanting to be a member of our community and contribute something. And so that's what it's about. It's not about being angry and trying to get more than anybody else. It's just equal access and opportunity.
Well, there's legitimate anger.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
If you can't access what you need,
Sure.
if a person is blocked from participating in something they really want to do,
Yeah.
there's good reason to be angry. And, that applies to anyone.
Sure. Sure. I think it's understanding when the perception is those people with disabilities are always so angry and bitter. Where the anger and bitterness is coming from. It's not just because, oh, we have disabilities and that's just our makeup. We're just angry and bitter people. No, it
right.
stems from,
that was a stereotype that has been exploited in media quite a bit.
Yeah,
I think, and it it was one of those things that really snowballed the way using disability to portray monsters and adversaries like Captain Hook and Freddy Krueger and all of the the horrible characters in films. And
yeah, that's a really cool educational opportunity, is to like take a look at the media, the movies, how disability is portrayed in books, because yeah, historically and even now, what are the views of disability that are being portrayed. And I know there's a big push right now for more inclusion of disability in the media. I think Netflix, I think, and Hulu have put some money behind, representing disability more accurately in the media. So I'm excited to see where that takes us. Because when you change perception, you change attitudes, and you change laws, and you change society. So
we do have one question, I think, that kind of pertains to this.
yes.
And the question was, what types of legislation would you like to see passed and why? That's a big one, probably, but I don't know if there's a couple of different things at the forefront right now that you might talk about in this change section.
Do you want to take that one, Renee?
Well, there's one thing that the Air Carrier Access Amendments Act. There's like a huge problem with wheelchairs being damaged when people fly, and so there are some senators and representatives who have gotten together to push an legislation to address that, because it's a tremendous expense, not just to people with disabilities, but to the public through Medicare and Medicaid and insurance companies. So this is something that goes to where it affects so many people that it's worth considering as a public good to make it.
And I don't want to get on my political high horse, because SIL is non-political, nonpartisan, but of course we advocate for things that are going to impact our consumers. And one of the things we're really focused on right now is the governor has proposed the CDS program that I mentioned earlier, the Consumer Directed Services Program, has proposed 2 cuts to that program. And so right now our focus is realize with the legislators, realize how important home and community-based services are and how much they save money in the long term by keeping people in their home. And not only are you impacting people with disabilities that need the service in order to stay in their home, need those attendant services, you're also taking away jobs, because home and community-based services provides jobs to the people that are providing that support. So that's really kind of what we're pushing right now. And I would say beyond that, I mentioned in a previous presentation that I am really excited at the whole concept of universal design and what that means for the future, that it impacts not just people with disabilities, but no matter where you find yourself in life, whether you're a baby in a stroller or an older adult, universal design will be something that everybody can enjoy.
Yeah, and the consumer directed services also, I think of my grandma who had to move to a nursing home, and we would have certainly preferred that she have access to some consumer directed services, but she didn't because of insurance limits, and she didn't qualify for Medicaid. And so I support the idea of making that part of infrastructure, because when you think about how much everyone benefits from knowing their grandparents, from being able to interact with their grandparents.
Mhm.
And my nieces and nephews would like opportunities to spend time with their great grandmother. But with COVID, the revealing such problems with nursing homes, we're seeing more and more about how it's a better idea for people to be able to stay in their homes long after they age.
And when you talk about legislation for people with disabilities, as I've said before, disability is the only group that any of us, wherever we find ourselves right now, can join at any time, whether that be, and that's not to scare anyone, or it's just facts. So, whether through temporary, you broke your leg and you're in a cast temporarily, or heaven forbid you're in an accident, or you have a chronic health condition or a mental health condition, it impacts everybody. So I always say it's not us versus them. It's going to benefit everybody if we look at policies and laws that support people with disabilities.
Exactly.
So are there any other, before we move on to COVID, are there any other thoughts or questions about independent living philosophy? I think we're pretty much right on schedule. I always get nervous that I'm not going to carve out enough time for each topic when we do more than one. All right, so moving on to COVID, and if there's any other questions about the last topic, of course, feel free to ask. So moving on to COVID, how has COVID impacted people with disabilities? And the first thing I put on the list is, I think, how it has impacted everybody. What we found when we reached out to people is just the overwhelming feeling of isolation, loneliness, depression, anxiety that being in quarantine has, not just on people with disabilities, but everyone. But it's just been really hard, and trying to figure out, when can we go back to face-to-face programming, when is it safe to get groups together. People are just chomping at the bit to just be with people again, be with their friends, be with their peers, and just so that's what we're hoping that we can plan, and we're We're working on doing some outdoor things on a smaller scale just so we can be together, because Zoom has been great, but people are getting zoomed out and people want that face-to-face interaction across the board. So I would say that's the primary thing that for individuals with disabilities, as with everyone. And of course, people with disabilities, because of underlying health conditions, and depending on their disability, if they're immunocompromised, have lung issues, COVID is going to hit them harder than individuals in other groups. And so just from my perspective, when this first started, I wasn't really worried about myself. I was worried about, my family, my friends. And then I started to think about the impact that it would have on me. And I thought, if I get COVID, and this was pointed out to me, if I get COVID, I am not, somebody told me that ideally you're supposed to be able to, walk and move around to help, with your breathing and get, the lungs. And if you're in a position where you are not mobile, that puts you at a disadvantage for recovery. And just in general, I am a very healthy person. I hardly ever get sick, but when I do get ill, it hits me hard because it impacts how my muscles move and my fatigue level. So you can imagine, if I got an extreme case of COVID, it's gonna hit me hard as it would other people with disabilities. And so, and with the mask mandate, some people with disabilities have issues with wearing masks, whether they have asthma, maybe they've been subject to trauma, and so wearing a mask is PTSD is difficult for them. Individuals that I've worked with autism have said wearing a mask, it's just they can't do it. It's just hard with their autism. So factoring in, depending on what your condition and maybe what you've gone through in your life experience, wearing a mask is not going to be for everyone. So when we have there were exemptions made, if you couldn't wear a mask, but if you're going out without a mask, people are going to say, why aren't you wearing your mask? Or they're going to ask you to leave because you're not wearing a mask. So that was something that we were
Well, I would point out also, beware, because there were fake ADA exemptions going around about the mask.
Yeah,
that were falsified, because there is no ADA exemption to putting other people in danger.
That's a great point. Yeah, that's a great point. Yeah.
Yeah.
And so one of the things that we try to do as an independent living center is, we're kind of the go-to for resource and information. So we had to, focus on educating about proper hygiene, disinfecting practices, providing masks, and the personal protective equipment, or the PPE. And then one of the main things that we also had to focus on, as we do in life in general, but all the consumers that we work with on the Consumer Directed Services Program have an emergency plan, a backup plan. What if your attendant cannot show up to provide you services? Well, you can imagine in this COVID world, people were not wanting to come to work if the person that they were working with was sick, or if they were sick, they were wanting to protect themselves and their family. And so people were left without care. And so we really had to really focus hard on, who do you have besides the person that, and they said, oh, this person, rain or shine, comes and takes care of me no matter what. Well, that's all fine and good, but what if they get sick? Where does that leave you? And during this time of COVID, I chose not to hire personal care attendants. because I made the decision not to have people coming in and out of my home. So my parents have been my primary caregivers. Well, my dad ended up getting COVID, which meant that he had to quarantine, as did my mother. And so neither one of them were available to provide me assistance. And so that has never happened before, where both my parents were unavailable. And so it was a wake-up call to me. Okay, what do I do? And so luckily I have a younger sister who lives in town, thank goodness, who was able to step in and provide that assistance. And I'm so blessed by that. But it is a challenge. It is a challenge to find, that support that you need. Is there anything you want to add to that, or your experiences, Renee? Of course, I know you don't need the level of support that I do, obviously, but still, there's challenges.
Right. Well, to me, my life really did not change a lot, because I have limited access to the world, basically, because I rely on public transportation. So I just cut back on it. and isolation is something that I have always been comfortable with, because I grew up in a big family. So I had 4 younger sisters when I was growing up. So I was able to adapt to it more easily than some people who were preferred more activity. And also I understood what it means to live in a science experiment, because I have a medical disability where I've had to try different medicines and go through a lot of failures. And so I understood that was part of what was ahead of us, and realignments and readjustments to the science, and that sometimes we would be getting some things wrong. So I was not shocked when there was first, no, don't use the mask. Yes, use the mask. I understood. Well, okay. Well, some people were just completely outraged. I just, expected to have those kinds of changes.
And you were the one that pointed out to me, as Renee often does, because she looks at the flip side, the positive side of things. She said, wearing a mask, you usually got what two colds a year?
Couple at least, yeah. And I haven't had one for over a year. So yeah. I'm a believer. I love wearing a mask.
Yeah.
And one question.
Oh, go ahead, Sadie.
Yes. So this question is, what area, and I think it's for either one of you or both, what areas do you feel that SIL was more prepared for than others in response to the pandemic? What areas do you notice for growth?
Oh, wow. Oh, I wish my executive director was here right now to help me field that question. Well, let me first say that any organization that you have that has a solid team as its foundation, any trials or tribulations you go through, or you have to do things you've never done before, or if you have that as a foundation, you can get through anything. And if you have good leadership from your executive director and your board, you can get through anything. I think there's always room for improvement when it comes, whether it's COVID or anything. There's always room for improvement with communication, just in general in an organization. I think we pride ourselves on communication, but at times I felt like in the hullabaloo of what was going on, communication was not always, could have been better, as with any organization. So I think I think just continuing to work on our communication, making sure everybody was on the same page. What, how many masks did we have? What equipment was going out? Who needed what? Particularly when we're trying to make sure who needs vaccines. What are we giving consistent information? Are we getting access to the most consistent information that we can give to people? And everything was in flux, as far as messaging, but just being consistent on your messaging and making sure everybody was on the same page as far as where was the latest vaccination site and what number should you call for this, that everybody had access to that information. One of the things that, and I don't know if this answers the question, but one of the things that we discovered in all this is I had always thought, gosh, it would be nice. Rene talked about access to transportation, and I have a van, but I don't drive. So I pay somebody to take me to and from work every day. And sometimes, it saves money on gas not to have to travel to and from work every day. And, you save money being able to work from home. And sometimes working from home is a lot more stress-free than working from the office. And I would think, gosh, I wonder what it would be like to be able to work from home. So COVID has really given, we have people with disabilities on our staff. COVID really forced us into the opportunity of seeing how this telework option worked for a lot of us. And I think what we're finding is it actually works pretty good. And so what remains to be seen is, will it continue once things die down? Will we continue to have the option? Will that be made more available to employees to do that? And so I'm kind of excited about that, if there is one silver lining that came out of this for the work that we do.
Thank you.
I don't know if that answered the question.
I think it was an excellent answer. And
Do you have any other things to add on that, Rene? About how
I'm also very interested to watch how this evolves now that we've seen this open up and seen these options open up. And I hope that they continue to be options for people who prefer them or who need them.
And we have another couple questions too.
Yeah.
Okay.
So,
great.
And maybe three actually.
Excellent, I love it.
So the first one is, has the COVID vaccine been accessible? I know some have said that the online signups have posed problems for some.
So we can assist individuals. We always offer, if there's any kind of online sign up for anything, we offer that support in doing that. But I know there came a time when there were finally options for those that were homebound, who couldn't get out to get access to a vaccine, that there were options for those that were homebound. And so that was a game changer for us. And then of course we provide transportation, and then the state was putting out word on, if you need transportation to get to your vaccine, don't let that be a barrier. We'll arrange transportation. You don't have to pay for it. But as far as the sign up, we did all we could to support people and in getting them on the list that they needed to be on. But again, it's about, are we giving them the right information about who to call, and are they on all the lists that they can be on, and encouraging that continued communication with their doctor and their pharmacy. And it's just a real concerted effort to cover all your bases.
And if you have limits on your transportation options, you couldn't go to another county when they had extra doses available. If we didn't have the opportunity to participate in those vaccination opportunities when they rose, or when they arose.
Well, I think that one of the challenges too is, you would have extra doses available, but they would say, you need to get here within 30 minutes of a phone call. Well, the thing about disability is spontaneity is not one of our strong suits. We can't just pick up and say, okay, I can be somewhere in that amount of time. So that kind of put us at a disadvantage. And then when communicating about those different tiers, about who is in what tier, and will I be eligible in this tier, and when will my time come? That was a lot of the education we were doing as well.
And we have another comment question as well. So one person says, yes, thank you. This was regarding a prior discussion. I think the work from home option is a great example of universal design. And then in relation to that, for those who are vulnerable to complications due to underlying health conditions, what ideas or advice do you have about navigating the workplace during a pandemic? Like places that aren't still.
So the question is, if you have an underlying health condition, how do you navigate? What was the piece?
Just what advice do you have about navigating the workplace during a pandemic with an underlying condition?
Well, Rene, did you want to touch on that? I give all the harder questions to Rene first.
And I really don't know. That's really not my area.
And I don't know if this answers the question, but I go from what I think of, what first comes to mind. I've been in an ADA conference, and one of the things that they talked about is asking for reasonable accommodations, which we've talked about before. And they said people with non-visible disabilities or underlying health conditions are going to be less likely to ask for accommodations. One, because their condition is non-visible, and two, they don't know what's available to them. So I have found with my coworkers that had the underlying health conditions and the chronic health conditions is they were more forthcoming about than they were before the pandemic of this is what I'm dealing with, and being around people, being in the office is going to be detrimental to my health. So yes, I want to continue to work from home, extend that telecommuting agreement. And so I guess that would be a positive of getting people to be more transparent about how these conditions that oftentimes are not visible impact, and whether that means you come back to the office and you need a reasonable accommodation of an extended break beyond what the policy manual says that is a reasonable accommodation. You need a office all to yourself. You need to take time off for medical appointments and readjust your schedule. Those are all accommodations that are offered to you as a person with a health condition. But you have to disclose it in order to get those accommodations.
Thank you.
Yeah, that's the important part, is that you have to disclose it. And I have known people who have not disclosed and then were fired over missing work.
Yeah.
Like, so it's in our interest a lot of times to disclose so that our employers know what page we're on.
You can't change the productivity standards. You can't take away essential functions of the job. But I think people don't realize how many options are available to them if they just open that dialogue with human resources, with their supervisor. And you can disclose if you've been working at a job for 5 years and you've never told somebody about an underlying health condition and how it impacts you, because maybe it hasn't impacted you until COVID hit. You could open that dialogue at any time and disclose and ask for an accommodation at any point in your employment, from the time that you apply for a job to when you've been on the job for 2 years or whatever. It doesn't matter. And you don't even have to put it in writing. There may be forms that your employer has for you to fill out, but the reasonable accommodation dialogue starts at the minute that you request it and say, this is what I need. And it should be interactive and ongoing.
Right. Yeah, I've always I recognized early on that it was in my interest to disclose epilepsy because people, it's safer for me if people know what to expect. It's safer and just easier if I have a seizure for people to understand what could happen.
Yeah, well, we did awesome on time. Oh, I will say, and if you got access to the handout, we put some resources in there, including the Crip Camp documentary. If you have not seen that, that's people in the disability community are so proud of that movie, obviously.
The representation is a big deal to.
Yeah, right. And so Rene and I have put our emails in the handout as well as Services for Independent Living's website. So feel free to reach out to us and say hi if you have any other questions, any other training opportunities for us. We just reach out to us. We'd love to hear from you, and thank you so much for having us for 3 of these. It's been a wonderful experience.
Yeah.
Thank you, Jill and Renee. Thank you so much for spending time with us. Like I told both of you before we went live today, how many people in our community have told us that these were very enlightening sessions. Very invaluable, your expertise, your wisdom, your advice, your thoughtfulness were just, very much appreciated. So
thank you. It's very rewarding to feel like you've done well. That you.
And you both have done tremendously well. And I want to thank everybody in our community who has participated in this presentation and in the others. Thank you for your comments and your questions. We have one person who just said thank you, very eye-opening.
Excellent, thank you.
So thank you for attending. Our very last facilitation experience will be next week. So that is next week, Wednesday, 12:30 to 1:30. It is facilitated by Angela Harvey, growthologist, on growth is the new sexy. So yes,
I may have to come to that one.
All right, you're invited. This interactive, engaging virtual experience will leave you clear about 4 essential components of personal growth and development. So that's what's coming next. Thank you again, Jill and Renee.
Thank you. Thanks, Renee.
Thanks.
Bye.
Bye.